Rediscovering Great Zimbabwe. A lost African empire, Great Zimbabwe is not just a place. It's a testament to the ingenuity and might of an African civilization that once thrived. Towering stone walls, silent courtyards, and a maze of ancient pathways whisper stories long buried under layers of colonial distortion and historical neglect. But those stones, still standing, still proud, refuse to be forgotten. They demand to be heard. Look closely. Rising from the southeastern hills of Zimbabwe, the ruins emerge like a mirage of history's massive granite walls, stretching into the sky without a single drop of mortar. The complex forms the shape of a royal city, the great enclosure, the hill complex, the valley ruins, and at the heart of it all, that mysterious conical tower, silent, defiant, and sacred. Who built this? Why? And what stories lie buried beneath its ancient soil? These are the questions that have haunted explorers, archaeologists, and storytellers for generations. When Europeans first stumbled upon the ruins in the 19th century, they couldn't believe that an African civilization had constructed something so grand. They scoured for alternate theories: Phoenicians, Arabs, even lost tribes of Israel. Any explanation except the truth that this architectural masterpiece, this seat of power and trade, was designed, built, and ruled by Africans. But the truth doesn't fade just because it's denied. And in recent decades, evidence has surged to the surface, reshaping the narrative. The builders were the ancestors of the Shona people, visionaries, who carved their empire from stone and soul, who wove their cultural beliefs into every curve of the wall, and who left behind clues not only in the architecture, but in oral traditions that still echo today. Picture this: centuries ago, traders from across the Indian Ocean, Arab merchants, Chinese seafarers journeyed inland, seeking gold, ivory, and other treasures. Their path led to Great Zimbabwe, a bustling hub, alive with commerce, culture, and political power. But that's not the story most of us were taught. The world forgot. Or worse, was taught to look away. But we're looking now. This is not a tale of a ruin. It's a revelation. Because when you stand within the massive stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, you don't just feel the past, you feel presence. And so we begin. Not at the beginning of time, but at the beginning of rediscovery. Step by step, stone by stone, we will walk through the remnants of this empire, not as distant observers, but as descendants, as seekers of truth. Because the greatest stories of Africa were never truly lost. They were hidden, waiting for us to return.
The wind that moves through the ruins of Great Zimbabwe doesn't just stir dust, it stirs memory. And as we wander deeper into its stone labyrinth, the walls begin to speak in silence. You see, these aren't just walls. They are blueprints of a civilization's brilliance, its pride, its soul, etched in every carefully placed granite block. Imagine walking into a city entirely built without mortar, where massive stones, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, fit so perfectly together that they stood firm for nearly 1,000 years. That's not coincidence. That's mastery. The builders' ancestors of the Shona people used a technique called dry stone walling. No cement, no modern tools, just skill, geometry, and a vision passed down through generations. The precision is staggering. Walls as high as 11 meters rise from the earth, curving with the contours of the land, wrapping around sacred spaces like guardians of memory. At the heart of it all stands the conical, tower solid, mysterious, rising like a symbol of authority. No doors, no windows, just presence. Some believe it represented a granary, a symbol of abundance and royal power. Others say it was spiritual, perhaps even cosmological. But whatever its purpose, it was never built to be explained. It was built to be revered. The entire layout of Great Zimbabwe is a story told in stone. There's the hill, complex, perched high above the valley, likely a royal citadel, where kings and spiritual leaders looked out over their domain. There, hidden within natural rock formations, are passageways, narrow corridors, and lookout points that suggest both defense and sacred ritual. And down below, in the valley ruins, you'll find evidence of everyday life. Homes, workshops, trading areas. The organization wasn't random. It mirrored the Shona worldview, hierarchical, sacred, orderly. Each section had purpose, each wall a boundary, not just of space, but of meaning. Architecture was not just functional here. It was cultural expression. The walls did not simply divide. They guided. They protected. Many believe the arrangement reflected the Shona's cosmological beliefs. The hill as the spiritual realm, the valley as the earthly domain, and the walls as the thread between the two. You can still feel that tension between the seen and unseen. Walk a little further, and you might notice how the entranceways curve and narrow, designed not just for defense, but perhaps to humble you as you enter. This was a space meant to shape behavior, to prepare the mind for what lay within. Even the acoustics play a part. Certain areas echo more than others. Was it intentional? Possibly. Music, drums, and chanting would have once bounced off these walls during rituals and ceremonies, carrying power through every stone. This was no village, no random settlement. This was a capitalist spiritual, economic, and political heart. and every stone was a decision, every space a reflection of something deeper. But even as we marvel at this construction, one question burns brighter than the rest. How did such a city come to be here? So far from the ocean, so deeply rooted in the heart of southern Africa. Who were the people that built Eton? How did they rise to such heights of power and influence? The answers lie not only in the stones, but in the soil, the trade routes, the gold, and the stories whispered by the ancestors. And to uncover that, we must look beyond the ruins and into the world that surrounded them, now to the rise of an empire. The story of Great Zimbabwe doesn't begin with stone, it begins with soil. Fertile, red earth that fed the people and cradled a civilization. Before there were walls, there were roots. The Shona people, skilled farmers and herders, understood this land. They worked with it, not against it, turning the surrounding plains into fields of sorghum, millet, and maize. Cattle grazed in the valleys, not just as food, but as wealth-living symbols of status and power. But Great Zimbabwe was more than just self-sufficient. It was connected. Imagine a vast network of trade stretching across the African continent and beyond. From the Indian Ocean coast, goods flowed inland: Persian ceramics, Chinese porcelain, glass beads, and textiles. And in return, gold, ivory, animal skins, salt. Great Zimbabwe was the heart of this movement, the engine that powered a regional economy. It wasn't just a city, it was a capital, a command center for trade and tribute. And at its peak, between the 11th and 15th centuries, it may have housed as many as 20,000 people. That's not a small town. That's a metropolis by medieval standards. Gold was central to its rise. Mined from nearby rivers and hills, it was panned and processed, then traded for foreign luxuries. The wealth it brought allowed the elite to build, to rule, to create a culture that still pulses in southern Africa today. But the Shona didn't just build wealth, they built identity. Their kings, known as Mambo, ruled with both political and spiritual authority. They were seen as intermediaries between the physical world and the ancestors. Their power was reinforced by ceremony, tradition, and the very architecture we explored earlier. The walls were not just for defense. They were expressions of order, hierarchy, and sacred space. But even the greatest empires face change. And by the 15th century, the signs of decline began to appear. Some scholars point to environmental strain. The land, once fertile and abundant, may have been pushed too hard, too many people, too much livestock, too little time to recover. Others suggest political unrest, rival factions, challenges to authority, or the shifting of power to new centers like Kami or Mutapa. And then there's the growing shadow of European arrival along Africa's coasts, with the Portuguese carving out trade monopolies and undermining local networks. The balance began to shift. Slowly, the golden thread that had connected Great Zimbabwe to the outside world began to fray. Trade routes changed, power moved, and eventually the city was abandoned. But it was not forgotten. Not by the descendants, not by the earth. The stones remained. The stories endured, preserved in Shona oral traditions, in the rhythms of their language, in the patterns of their art. Yet, for centuries, outsiders refused to believe. They tried to erase the memory, to rewrite the truth. They called it a mystery because the idea of a powerful Black African empire building something so magnificent didn't fit their narrative. But the ruins never lied, and neither did the people. Now, as we walk away from the bustle of the once mighty city, we don't see the end. We see a turning point, one that leads not into silence, but into reclamation. Because this isn't just about stones. This is about memory, about legacy, and the long overdue recognition of a civilization that shaped southern Africa long before foreign flags ever touched its soil. The echoes of Great Zimbabwe may have faded from global memory for centuries, but they never vanished from the hearts of the people. Beneath the rubble, history waited. And when archaeologists began to dig not just with shovels, but with open minds, they didn't just uncover artifacts, they unearthed truth. But it wasn't easy. The early excavations were marred by colonial interference. European settlers clung to the lie that such grand architecture couldn't possibly be the work of Black Africans. The truth threatened their control, their myth of superiority. So they buried it again, this time with words, denying the Shona their rightful legacy. Even academic institutions refused to believe. Karl Mach, one of the first European explorers to describe the site in the 1870s, claimed it must have been built by the Queen of Sheba. Others credited Arab traders or Phoenicians, anyone but Africans. It was deliberate erasure, theft of identity, masked as scholarly doubt. But truth is stubborn. And in the decades that followed, African scholars and archaeologists pushed back. They sifted through layers of stone, soil, and propaganda to reveal the undeniable: Great Zimbabwe was built by Africans for Africans. Today, that battle for truth continues, not with weapons, but with preservation, education, and pride. Great Zimbabwe is now protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized not only for its architectural significance, but for its cultural and historical power. Conservation teams work carefully to stabilize the dry stone walls, preserving the delicate balance of engineering and art that has endured for centuries. Each stone repositioned, each fragment catalogued, is a victory against the silence of colonial denial. But the work goes beyond ruins. In schools across Zimbabwe, children learn about the mambos, the stone towers, and the trade routes that made their ancestors powerful. Museums, cultural centers, and academic programs strive to keep the story alive, not as a distant memory, but as a living legacy. And it's not just Zimbabwe. Across the continent, Great Zimbabwe has become a symbol. For South Africans, Kenyans, Nigerians, sits proof that Africa was never a dark, empty continent waiting to be discovered. It was alive. It was brilliant. It was connected to the world long before colonizers arrived with ships and guns. The ruins stand now not only as a monument to the past, but as a challenge to the future, to rethink history, to reclaim identity, to restore pride. They remind us that African civilizations were never primitive. They were complex, innovative, and deeply rooted in spiritual and social systems that deserve respect. This is more than archaeology. It's a cultural reawakening, a reminder that the stories told in classrooms and museums must be rebalanced, not with guilt, but with truth, not with pity, but with pride. Because when you stand inside the great enclosure or run your hand across the sun-warmed stones of the hill complex, you're not just touching history, you're touching resilience. A resilience that speaks not just to Zimbabweans, but to every African whose story was dismissed, distorted, or denied. The walls still stand, and so does the legacy. The rediscovery is not just about the past, it's about what we do with it now.
The story of Great Zimbabwe does not end with its ruins, it lives on, carved into the identity of a people, echoed in their songs, their art, their language. The stones may be still, but the spirit moves. And that spirit of resilience, of brilliance, of cultural pride continues to shape Africa's present and future. Walk through a modern Zimbabwean village and you might see echoes of the past in the circular layout of homes. Listen to the mumbira traditional thumb piano of the Shona Hun. Feel how the rhythm carries generations of memory. Its heartbeat. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe isn't just architectural. It's deeply spiritual and cultural. Shona cosmology still honors the Mudzimu ancestral spirits who guide the living. Ceremonies are still held at sacred hills, where offerings are made to the ancestors. The worldview that shaped Great Zimbabwe, the balance between the earth and the divine, between community and leadership, has not vanished. It evolved. Contemporary artists, poets, and musicians across Zimbabwe and southern Africa are reclaiming this heritage. They draw from the symbols of Great Zimbabwe, the conical tower, the soapstone birds, the winding stone walls as metaphors for identity, freedom. Fashion designers incorporate traditional patterns into their work. Writers breathe life into forgotten myths. Hip-hop artists drop verses about mambos and royal cities, turning ancient pride into modern power. But beyond the cultural revival lies a deeper truth. The story of Great Zimbabwe has sparked a continental awakening. In Kenya, in South Africa, in Nigeria, people are asking hard questions. What other empires were denied to us? Whose voices were silenced? The narrative of African history is shifting not because the facts have changed, but because Africans are finally reclaiming the right to tell their own stories. No longer through the lens of conquest or colonization, but through the lens of dignity. Great Zimbabwe reminds us that Africa was not passive. It was powerful. Its people weren't waiting to be civilized, they were already building cities, governing kingdoms, mastering trade, and creating cultures that endured. And still, there is so much left to uncover. Questions remain about the origins of the Shona people, their migrations, their kinship structures, their interactions with neighboring societies. These mysteries are not voids, they're invitations. To learn, to explore, to expand what we think we know about Africa. So, let this be your call to action. Dante, let Great Zimbabwe remain just a story in a video, or a name in a textbook. Read, travel, ask, question. Support African historians, filmmakers, and artists who are bringing these stories to light. Because the legacy of Great Zimbabwe, it's about what can be. A continent rising not from the ashes, but from the shadows cast by history's distortions, rising with truth, with pride, with power. The stones still stand. And so do we.